You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Wills and Probate podcast. Today we are talking with Aleks Tomczyk, co-founder and managing director of Exizent. And the topic of discussion today is the recently released Bereavement Index, an annual survey that you guys undertake of legal profession, of individuals and of financial services around the bereavement process, and some sentiment and some statistical information around it as well. You will probably explain it an awful lot better than me, Aleks. It's the fourth year you've done it as well, and I know we've discussed it on the podcast 2 or 3 times as well, so it'll be interesting to see how the report has developed over that time. So thank you very much indeed for joining.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be here.
A very short introduction. Perhaps in the first instance, you might tell us a little bit about yourself or remind us about yourself, because you, as you say, you've been on the podcast before, and talk to us about what this report is, some of the methodology and what you're trying to achieve with it.
Sure. I'm one of the 2 co-founders of Exizent, along with Nick Cousins. We founded Exizent very explicitly with the purpose of making the processes of bereavement easier for everyone involved. And by everyone involved, if you think of a triangle with a group of stakeholders on each corner, first of all, the individuals, the family members, the beneficiaries of a will that are going through the death of a family member or friend. Secondly, and the topic of most of our conversation today, the legal services professionals that help, both in terms of pre-death planning, but in particular from Exizent's perspective, the post-death administration of an estate, executory from Scotland, probate, if you're in England and Wales, and all the variations of terminology that there are. And then the third group, the institutions we call them, but that's particularly financial services companies, so banks, pensions, life assurance, etc., and also other types of institutions that have information on the assets and the liabilities of the estate. So we founded this business basically because of some experiences that we'd been through and looking at the processes, and then getting some feedback from all of those stakeholder groups to say, well, and people saying, well, actually, this doesn't work as it could be better. And what can we do to help with that? So that's what Exizent's all around, making that process easier for all of those people involved. And in many respects, today's Bereavement Index discussion is a bit of a benchmark for that. You know, we created this with a view of it being a state of the nation to understand how all those 3 major stakeholder groups were feeling about, and you know, it aims to try and do that. So I particularly focus on the legal services side of the business. We provide a modern piece of cloud-based software which enables probate practitioners to manage a case from start to finish. That's the professionals that work in it. We don't provide anything direct to consumer for a whole variety of reasons that we don't believe that's the right model. And we want people to have professional help at a time in their lives when they need it most. And there's various stats actually in the Bereavement Index as to why that's a good idea, that I'm sure people will pick out. But yes, so that's us and me and my background really.
So the report itself this year split up into 2 particular sections, and you released chapter 1 earlier in the year that was focused on individuals, and then you've just released chapter 2, which is focused on legal professionals. As a quick recap, chapter 1, what were the key takeaways? What's the key sort of sentiment around how people feel about bereavement?
First of all, why did we split it into 2 is an interesting answer. So the previous 3 years we've produced one very large report, and we had been getting feedback from the market and indeed from our own observations that actually some of the important findings and learnings in there were being missed because it was one very big document full of data. So what we thought we would do is try and break it down into a little bit more digestible chunks, which can enable people to think about it and also enables us to market it slightly, to promote it slightly differently, so that people who are the key audience for this particular part of the Bereavement Index can be, we can communicate most effectively with them, and likewise with the next part. So that's why we did it. The methodology is broadly the same. as it always has been. And part of that is so that we get meaningful comparisons year on year. So we use an outside agent for the part one piece, the individuals. We use an external professional research organisation to recruit and to survey a large swathe of people that have been through the probate process over the last recent couple of years, and then they go through structured questions in order for us to get good feedback and comparisons and benchmarks with their views. What did that part one show us this year? Well, it broadly showed us some of the same things that we had seen in previous years, which are the impacts of a bereavement are significant. There's obviously the emotional impacts which affect different people differently. But there's also substantial financial impacts and mental health impacts as well on people. I think, for the audience of this particular podcast, what's particularly encouraging in that feedback was from individuals was that people really value the help that they get from professionals in the space. And that speaks a little bit to Exizent's mission as well, because our view is that when people need help, they should be able to access it, promoting the fact that actually people that do find it really valuable is a key message out of that part one of the Bereavement Index. So I think, the substantial impacts on the lives of people emotionally, financially, and in terms of their mental health are key. The other thing that I think is often not seen from and not expected perhaps is that the age demographic of people impacted is evolving. I think people often think that it's older people that deal with the bereavement of a family member or friend, and clearly if it's a spouse, then that is nearly always the case. But actually the data shows that there's a lot of younger people who are dealing with the administration of an estate after a family member or friend has died as well. And that's an often unexpected piece of data. That's important for a range of reasons. It's important for people providing services to them, because actually there's a lot more communication that needs to be done slightly differently for people that perhaps are more digital or are less world experienced of how to deal with these things, probably haven't seen this before as well. So there's lots of so what's in that data as well.
And of course, we're talking in the days after the budget where we anticipate that a sizable number of people, or more people, are going to be drawn into IHT and all the challenges that come with that as well.
Absolutely, David. I mean, I think the numbers of estates that are going to require to pay inheritance tax now over the next few years are going to go up. The amounts they're going to pay are going to go up as well, and that's going to impact a whole range of people, including in the estate planning piece as well, pre-death. But also I think that the complexity of what's going to result from the announcements in the budget is going to be significant. Things phasing in over different times, the shifted policy fundamentally on treatment of pensions and businesses and farms and things like that. They're going to have some short-term impacts on the way in which probate is managed and estates are administered. But it will also have some longer term impacts, I think, in terms of what people do with their money in their life and as they plan for their death as well. It will also have an impact, therefore, on the people that they leave behind in terms of what they can expect. So I think there's going to be a lot of change over the next few years in terms of those pieces. But then you get into the nitty gritty, how is it actually going to happen post-budget, and that is very interesting, because as ever when someone announces a budget, there's an awful lot of consultation, of discussion, of iteration of those ideas, and just working out how to make it work. But I think it's important. For me, one of the less well reported pieces in the budget was a short paragraph which allocates a sum, I think it was 56 million, to digitize the IHT submissions over the next few years. Well, I've spent a lot of time doing major technology transformation programs, and I know this domain pretty well. That seems like a very small amount of money for the state of where we are today and the complexity that is involved now, plus what's going to be coming in the future. So there's lots of interesting things in the budget. There's lots of the intent to move forward, particularly with that digitization of the IHT process. I think is a really good one and positive for the sector. But there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road. If I was talking to a member of HMRC at the moment, I was saying to them, engage with the sector. Let's do this together. It's in the best interests of the people of the country, the citizens of the country, for you to get that transformation right. And there are a bunch of people who genuinely want that to work well, that can help. Let's engage and let's try and drive the future together that works for everyone. I don't think anyone wants to see the equivalent of the massive spike in wait times for probate in England and Wales as a transformation project. Transformation project is difficult, but there are ways that you can mitigate the risk and improve the outcomes for everyone.
All of which leads rather neatly into the content of the report, actually, because there are two important takeaways, and I'm sure there are more that you're going to highlight as well, but two important takeaways that I look at in the report. One is exactly that point that you just made about technology. There seems to be a real concern from practitioners that we need government to be better. We need government to be faster. 57% of your respondents said that delays with HMCTS and HMRC were a big issue for them. The second thing that I take away from what you said there is that if we're about to see both pre-death a big boom in activity with the Great Wealth Transfer, and if you've not listened to the Great Wealth Transfer podcasts that we've done, please do go back and listen to them, because they give you some context around that. But post-death, what you're saying is that if more estates are going to get drawn into IHT, there's going to be more work effectively to be done post-death, and we've already got a capacity issue.
Yeah, there's definitely more work to be done. I think we have, yes, there's a capacity issue, but there's also the fact that, in the positive sense, there's the fact that everyone recognises that the current process is currently, not everyone, only 94% of legal professionals think that the current process is slow and complicated. But the good side of that is that everyone knows that it can be improved. And once again, you see that in some of the solutions that come out of the Bereavement Index this year, that in addition to wanting faster response from the public sector, there's, the two of the other key findings are about the drafting of documentation, the adoption of technology. Software is good at that stuff, and technology is good at that stuff. Putting the data in once, using it many times to populate your court forms. Court forms are much more complex in Scotland. They are in England and Wales, for example. But populate your IHT forms, populate your estate accounts, all those sorts of things. That technology is good at that sort of stuff. And consistently over the last few years, the Bereavement Index, we've seen technology as if not the top, then very close to the top of investment priorities from our legal services research feedback. So that will I think continue, and in many respects with the budget context, it probably needs to accelerate for the good of the clients, of everyone working in the probate space, but also for the good of the firms, because actually there's it's about business efficiency and productivity, and therefore business as well, but also for the individuals crucially working on the space, whether solicitors, paralegals. People are increasingly expecting modern software tools that enable them to work, and I think that's really important for the business as well. And just putting my really big picture legal law tech hat on, if you want to talk about law tech as being an enabler of access to justice in its broadest possible sense, not in terms of the criminal, but enabling access to legal services at a time when you need it, then actually the more efficient that firms become, then the more they are able to offer those services out to individuals who wouldn't otherwise afford to need them at a time when they need it. So I think there's a whole big spectrum of things behind why that second strategy for improving the process, if you like, the adoption of technology is really important. And I think the other thing that sort of relates to that, the other key strategy that we pull out in the report relates to communications with institutions, with financial services companies. And as I've touched on in my introduction of what we're doing, we're focused on that as well. And the third side of our stakeholder groups is something that we've made a huge amount of progress on this year, and we generate a lot of qualitative and quantitative feedback from financial services and other firms about what's driving them to improve. And they agree. The good thing for all legal services professionals listening to this podcast is that they agree that things could get better, and they want to. And we're helping them with another side of our software that's gone live in the last year to enable them to communicate better, more efficiently, more effectively with individuals notifying them of one of their customers' deaths, but also the professionals that are listening to this. And the feedback on the work we've done there has been tremendous, and that is going to really help. And from their perspectives, and I know that's not the topic of today's Bereavement Index part, but they see the value because they want to improve their operational efficiency. They want to manage their risk. They have an obligation under the consumer duty regulations to do better. And they also want to do better in terms of keeping assets under management. You mentioned the great intergenerational wealth transfer. They all recognize that as well. They recognize that in addition to their regulatory obligations and just doing the right thing, they want to improve their customer journey in the bereavement arena, because it's in their own interests too as well to prevent some of the horror stories you read on the internet about how someone has had to communicate 53 times with their bank in order to be able to settle Auntie Maud's estate. They know that they've got to do better, and they want to, and that's the consistent message of the feedback we get from them as well. So those three strategies that pulled out of feedback from the legal services part of the Bereavement Index, it's reflected in those other conversations that we're having as well. And the good news is that everyone wants to move forward. My only slight caveat, if you look at one of the headline stats from this Bereavement Index part 2, we've been doing this for 4 years now, this Bereavement Index, and what we hoped when we started Bereavement is we would start to see some improving trends in output, but in fact we're not particularly. I think we're seeing the really headline stuff is static or varying a little bit, and actually in the sense of the legal firms, the trend over the last 3 years has been to see the percentage of legal firms who think the process can be better going up, not down. And I think that's, these strategies to address that I think are really important. But I think if anything, the pace needs to accelerate.
We're asking this question at a time when probate delays are not quite at their worst, but I mean, certainly over the last 12, 18 months, they've been extensive. So, perhaps we might take some of that sentiment through that prism. But I just wanted to pick up on one or two of the things that you said there around some of the administrative challenges that firms face, which kind of bleeds over into recruitment and retention. And I see a huge number of parallels here between lots and lots of different legal services. Lawyers, they train to be lawyers. They do not train to be administrators. They do not train to push paper around. And 85% of professionals report sending more than 10 letters per case. 12% say they're dispatching over 50 letters per case, and you've also got a stat here that suggests that the average number of assets and liabilities on a case is 12 and split, as we've talked about, over lots of different financial institutions. The point here is that, as you said, we've got to use technology to reduce that friction, to enable lawyers to do what they do best. But also from a firm's point of view, if you are a little outdated, and you've got statistics here that suggest that lots of firms are still using the Microsoft Office suite and not specialist software and that kind of thing, that you are going to struggle to recruit, you're going to struggle to retain people, and that capacity issue that we talked about at the start is going to remain.
I think it's a really important point. I just as a reaffirmation of that, I'm on the board of Law Scott Tech. I live in Edinburgh. Through those connections, I went along to one of the universities who were running a program for the trainees of firms, and it was about introducing legal tech to this group of, I think there were about 40 trainees, and it was a pilot program, and there were 5 tech firms, and I presented I presented a few slides on what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. What struck me is in that room, there wasn't a notebook or pen. There were laptops open. And people taking notes. They asked some excellent questions at the time and afterwards one-to-one, but that's the future of the next generation of legal professionals. They're digital native. And that's really important for recruitment and retention in cities. I think it's potentially even more important in more rural locations. Our customer success team, we pride ourselves on providing good, quick answers to any questions that people come across. And our customers had literally had people crying on the phone because of their workload. And that's not good for recruitment and retention in the profession. And this is not even a particularly isolated. I mean, maybe that was a slight extreme in terms of the emotion involved, but the fact that people are often isolated, they're perhaps working in multidisciplinary practices where they don't get the specialist support. These things. If we're going to keep people in profession that service the volumes that we need at the right time, then I think we need to be doing what we can to make the job as easy to do as possible, to enable the professionals to do what they are specialists at, which is providing advice and making sure that the client is happy and getting a good result, rather than dealing with process and administration. And I think that speaks to the administration, whether that's sending letters and to third parties, or whether that's typing things into or still filling out a form with ink, which is what goes on still in an awful lot of places. I'm not criticizing it, so just the way it's where we come from, but the point is, and I think what the Bereavement Index tells you, is that the way forward is different.
So if we can lean into that way forward, what's the so what of the Bereavement Index? What are the things that firms need to be taken away from it? We've obviously identified recruitment and retention, and I'm a really big advocate of that. As I say, I see that across the publications that we host as a business, as Today's Media. So we work in residential conveyancing and wills and probate and family. It is a theme across all of those disciplines. What are the other so whats that come out of the index for you this year?
Administration and efficiency of administration is one of the key things. If you take an overarching topic, transformation, there are some people undoubtedly listening to this who will be reading the Bereavement Index and going, oh, we're working on that, we're working on this, we're working on that. But if you take the overarching theme as transformation, then actually there's a need to be working on it. And I think administration is one of the key areas. Trying to reduce the administration so we can focus on providing the value-added services, helps individuals, helps clients, helps the firm. Happy days. I think that's a great approach. I think data is a fundamental thing that sits across all of the feedback that we get. It's about exchange of data with third parties. It's about managing that data in-house. It's about getting it right in-house, because actually, rework is something that carries risk for a firm and potentially can impact both in terms of reputation and in terms of things like professional indemnity insurance as well. So those things, getting the data right is really important. I think there is a piece, again, leaning into that transformation, which is about trying to move the sector forwards. We've talked a little bit earlier about the potential digitization of HMRC and related to IHT, but it is a continual frustration, and we try and campaign with a number of different bodies that you can't, for example, get digital validation of death certificate, definitive digital validation of a death certificate. That there is so much paper that still needs to be paper, and those things. So I think there's a piece around how, as a industry, we influence the public sector's involvement. There is a really important piece that we've not touched on, where clients go to a professional for help in wills, in estate planning, estate administration. They really value it. And I think we should really hold on to that as a key theme, because in my view, most people get into this sector because they want to help, because they want to do better for their clients. And the good news is, the feedback from the clients is that they agree that professionals help and they value that. So let's build on that. Let's keep doing the things that are right, but let's adapt, evolve, transform in order to enable us to do that for more people, to enable them to get to the ones that we are already working with, to get better outcomes, to make the process quicker, to make the process smoother, to make it less stressful and have less financial impact on them. You know, there's a really important theme, which it's very easy in the Bereavement Index to focus on things, the stats. There's a lot of data in there, and if anyone listening hasn't downloaded it, it's a lot more bite-sized this year, but there's still a lot of really interesting stuff that you could maybe even have a lunch and learn and discuss with your team. But it's quite easy to focus on both the things that we don't think are right and also the things that we need to do to solve them. But actually there's a hell of a lot of good work going on in the space, and we should celebrate that. We do at the British Wills and Probate Awards every year, and I'm sure everyone does that in their firms as well. You know, as one of the judges, I've seen some of the submissions and I'm going, wow, some of these firms are really impressive. So, you know, I think there's a really important piece in there that comes out of the Bereavement Index, which is keep doing the good stuff, but let's not sit in our laurels. Let's keep driving. Let's try and make sure that there are things that we can do that improve it for everyone. Technology is undoubtedly one of them. Influencing the public sector is undoubtedly one of them. Transformation, adopting our own business models is another piece that comes out in the report. These are all things that we can do.
If that's a very uplifting almost end to the discussion, Aleks, let me finally touch on, I think, a very practical point that the index surfaces, which is that there's a real disconnect between firms who say they want to invest in technology, and indeed the index, again, as a trend, is saying that it's a big priority for firms to invest in technology, and that delivery, what actually is happening in terms of, are we materially making an impact on individuals' working lives? And again, I think the index probably highlights the fact that there's a huge amount of administration. We've talked about that already today. What practically can firms do to reduce that gap between intent and delivery?
One of the things that I've talked about quite a few times this year, presentations at events, and I did a webinar, I think in Q1 as well, was not really talking about Exizent, just talking about legal technology adoption, because I think, you know, and not necessarily indeed in this domain, but in general as well. I think it's fair to say that, particularly outside maybe the top 100 firms, that legal technology adoption is difficult. It's perceived as risky, and it perhaps doesn't proceed at the pace that it might do. People have got a lot of experience of previous pieces of technology that perhaps, you know, in years gone by with that are perhaps clunky, don't deliver what they say they're going to do, and then are expensive and a nightmare to remove. So actually the risk has been too high. I think there's also a piece there which is about knowing what to adopt. Most people are really busy and doing the law and doing the best job for their clients, and why would they therefore need to be experts in technology adoption? Myself and Alan, our head of technology, did a workshop for the partner strategy conference of a fairly large private client firm a while back, and one of the things that I took away from that was actually that these are people that are experts in doing private client work, and they shouldn't necessarily be experts in legal technology and how to adopt it. So actually, what kind of practical steps? Well, I've got there's another whole presentation on that, but I would say things like, don't be scared of engaging from a sales perspective with technology providers, particularly modern technology providers. It is incumbent on technology providers, software providers like us, to try and make it as easy as possible to adopt, to understand the benefits that you need. So just engage, talk, ask questions, you know, ask how other people have found it, talk to their other clients. Aim to try and do trials or pilots or both, because, you know, that will, and provide open, honest feedback on those, whether when you're doing those, but also once you've adopted a piece of technology. Every software provider wants you to be happy using, well, all good software providers you want to be dealing with will want you to be happy using your product. They'll want you to feedback on things that you would want to be improved, and share it more as a partnership than as a client-supplier type relationship. And if you can build a relationship with a technology company that's got that kind of culture, then I think that's going to be something that would be good for everyone. So therefore, I would look out for that. I would think very carefully on and lean on the advice of those firms in terms of how to adopt, create some champions internally that will enable those things to happen. I always say, when I used to run very big technology change programs, I used to say, Doesn't matter technically how good you do the project, unless you get the business readiness, the business mobilization, the training bit right, then you've just wasted a shed load of money. So I would say, whatever technology you're adopting, be really clear on what you're looking for it to do, the problems you're trying to solve, talk to the suppliers that could potentially do it for you, and then go into the relationship with your eyes open, providing appropriate feedback. These things are all really good ways of making sure that it is a success. And if you don't do those, then there's much higher chance of failure. But you've also got to commit to it. If you have a couple of people playing on the edges, then ultimately it might not be successful. But there's an old cliche in technology, which is, unless you've got senior director buy-in, CEO buy-in, then it just won't happen. And I think that's true. So leadership is also important in there as well.
Well, that's a lovely way to end the podcast, Aleks. A really upbeat message. We're doing the right things. Keep on doing the right things, but look at how we can continue to do them better. I'm a big fan of marginal gains. If you can do everything that you do just a few percentage points better, it all adds up to a much bigger overall improvement. So thank you so much for joining the podcast, sharing your insight, and for the information on the Bereavement Index, which can be downloaded from the Exizent website.
That's correct, yes. Just either come to our website and you'll find it fairly straightforwardly, or search for Bereavement Index 2024 and you'll find it too.
And I would encourage people to do so. It's an excellent piece of research. Thank you very much indeed, Aleks. The Today's Wills and Probate podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on today's willsandprobate.co.uk. My thanks to Aleks. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.